Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku's quirk let him inherit the pain of others and their power. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was muted. That was the only way Izuku Midoriya could describe it. The normally vibrant symphony of the city, the rumble of trains, the distant chatter of crowds, the hum of 1,000 air conditioners, had faded into a dull, monotonous drone. Even the sun, a blistering tyrant in the late afternoon sky, seemed to have lost its color. It was just heat, a suffocating blanket that pressed down on his shoulders with the same leaden weight as his despair. He walked, one foot in front of the other. The cracked pavement was a mosaic of gray and black, and he watched his worn-out red sneakers scuff across it, the sounds swallowed by the thick, humid air. In his hands he clutched his notebook. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. The cover was singed, the edges blackened and curled like burnt leaves. The pages inside were soaked, the ink of his meticulous notes bleeding into abstract, watery shapes of blue and black. It felt like holding the corpse of a dream. All Might's words echoed in the hollow space where his hope used to live. It's not wrong to dream. However, you need to be realistic, kid. Realistic. The word was a shard of glass in his chest. For 10 years, ever since the doctor with the mercilessly kind smile had pointed at an X-ray of his foot and shattered his world, Izuku had fought against realism. He had clung to the flickering image of All Might on his computer screen, the hero's booming laugh a mantra against the taunts of his classmates, and the pitying looks of his teachers. He had filled 13 notebooks with data, strategies, and desperate, frantic prayers disguised as analysis. He had built a fortress of fantasy to protect the fragile, beating heart of his ambition, and today, his god had torn it down with his own 2 hands. Without a quirk, it's just not possible. Izuku's throat tightened. A familiar burn started behind his eyes, but the tears wouldn't come. He felt too empty to cry, as if All Might had not only crushed his dream but had also siphoned out the very capacity for emotion, leaving only a dull, throbbing ache. He had seen the hero's secret, the skeletal form, the gruesome, starburst-shaped wound, the wisps of steam that signaled a dying fire. He had been entrusted with a truth that no one else knew, and in return, his own truth had been rendered worthless. A quirkless hero was a fantasy. A joke. The punchline Kaken had been delivering his entire life. He almost didn't hear it at first. A distant, muffled boom. Izuku flinched, his head snapping up. It was just a sound, common enough in a city teeming with quirks and the chaos they often wrought. He should have kept walking. He should have gone home, crawled into bed, and let the gray numbness swallow him whole. But his feet stopped. Another boom, louder this time, closer. It was followed by the shriek of twisting metal and a chorus of panicked screams. The drone of the city was broken, replaced by the sharp, electric notes of crisis. A pillar of black smoke began to curl into the sky just 2 blocks ahead, staining the pale blue canvas. Every rational thought in his head told him to turn around. You're not a hero. You can't do anything. You'll just get in the way. All Might's voice, now a warden in his own mind, repeated the verdict. Be realistic. But his legs, those traitorous limbs that had carried him into danger so many times before, turned him towards the smoke. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a reflex, as deeply ingrained as breathing. A moth drawn to a flame it knew would destroy it. His heart, which had been a dead weight in his chest moments before, began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. He broke into a run, the ruined notebook still clutched in his hand. The sounds grew sharper, the screams more distinct. He rounded a corner and slammed to a halt, the scene before him a tableau of urban horror. It was the villain from before. The putrid, semi-liquid creature made of green sludge that All Might had captured in a soda bottle. The bottle must have fallen from his pocket during their rooftop confrontation. Izuku's stomach plummeted. This was his fault. His fawning, his questions, his interruption, it had led to this. The villain was larger now, a writhing, amorphous mass of sewage and malice that had filled the narrow street. It had wrapped itself around the lampposts and storefronts, its body a glistening, toxic prison, and in its center, trapped and thrashing, was a victim. A boy with spiky, ash-blonde hair, his uniform the same as Izuku's. A boy who was setting off explosions from his palms, futilely trying to blast his way free. Kaken. Izuku's breath hitched. The world, which had been muted and gray, snapped into horrifyingly sharp focus. He could see the terror in Bakugo's eyes, a wide, primal fear that Izuku had never, ever seen on his friend's face. Bakugo was the pinnacle of strength, the definition of confidence. To see him look so desperate, so utterly powerless, was like watching the sun fall from the sky. The villain was forcing itself down his throat, muffling his defiant roars and stifling the very explosions that were his pride. The pro-heroes were there, but they were paralyzed. Death Arm stood with his powerful limbs crossed, shouting, "I can't get a grip on him! He's too fluid!" Kamui Woods was desperately trying to evacuate civilians, his wooden arms snagging panicked people and pulling them to safety. "He's got a hostage, and the fire is spreading! My Quirk is weak to flames!" he yelled, gesturing at the small infernos sparked by Bakugo's struggling blasts. And the new hero, Empty Lady, stood helplessly at the mouth of the alley. "I can't get through! I need at least a 2-lane road to maneuver in my giant form." They were talking about what they couldn't do. They were analyzing, waiting, strategizing. Waiting for a hero with the right quirk. No one was moving. No one was saving him. Izuku's blood ran cold. He felt a phantom pressure in his own chest, an echo of Bakugo's suffocating plight. He could hear the crowd murmuring, "Why aren't the heroes doing anything? The villains got him good. Poor kid, that's the sludge monster from the incident this morning. Didn't All Might catch him?" All Might. Where was he? Izuku scanned the rooftops, his heart sinking further as he remembered the hero's steaming, skeletal form. He had used up his time. He was out there somewhere, a civilian just like Izuku, powerless to help. It was all his fault. If he hadn't clung to All Might's leg. If he hadn't asked his stupid questions. Bakugo was dying because of him. Time seemed to slow down. Izuku saw every detail. He saw the way the sludge constricted around Bakugo's chest, a living straitjacket. He saw Bakugo's eyes, red-rimmed and frantic, lock with his own for a split second. And in that gaze, Izuku saw something beyond fear. He saw a plea, a silent, desperate scream for help from the one person he would never, ever ask for it. And in that moment, All Might's words, the doctor's diagnosis, Kaken's years of mockery, all of it burned away into nothing. They were just words. This was real. This was a person, right here, right now, who was going to die. He didn't remember deciding to move. 1 second, he was frozen behind the police line, a useless, quirkless observer. The next, his legs were pumping, the worn red sneakers slapping against the asphalt as he sprinted past the barricade, past the stunned heroes, past the gasping crowd. "Hey! Kid! Stop!" Death Arms shouted. "Idiot! You'll get yourself killed!" Kamui Woods cried out. Their voices were distant, distorted by the roar in his ears. The world had narrowed to a single, terrifying tunnel. At the end of it was Bakugo, his face turning a sickening shade of blue, his struggles growing weaker. "What am I doing?" The rational part of his brain screamed. "I have no plan. I have no quirk." But his body didn't listen. It was moving on pure, distilled instinct. His mind, the analytical machine that had filled 13 notebooks, took over. Weaknesses? Eyes. He has solid parts. He swung his yellow backpack off his shoulder, the heavy textbooks inside giving it a satisfying weight. With a desperate yell, he hurled it at the villain. The bag spun through the air and struck the creature squarely in one of its large, bulbous eyes. The villain shrieked, a high-pitched, gurgling sound, and its grip loosened for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Bakugo's head broke the surface of the sludge. He coughed, a ragged, wet sound, and sucked in a desperate gasp of air. "Deku?" He choked out, his voice a mixture of disbelief and fury. "What the hell are you doing here?" "I don't know," Izuku screamed back, his voice cracking with terror as he clawed at the villain's slimy body. "My legs they just started moving." The sludge felt like cold, viscous mud mixed with gravel. It resisted him, sucking at his hands, trying to pull him in. Kaken, I couldn't just stand there and watch you die. The villain, recovering from the blow, roared and began to tighten its grip again. Its malevolent yellow eyes focused on Izuku, a new target. You idiot! Get away! Bakugo snarled, but his voice was weak, his strength fading. Izuku ignored him. He kept digging, his fingers searching for something, anything solid. He had to get him out. He had to save him. The desire was no longer a thought. It was a physical force, a white-hot supernova exploding in his chest. It was the most powerful thing he had ever felt, a desperate, all-consuming need that dwarfed every other sensation. He shoved his hand deeper into the suffocating mass, his arm submerged to the elbow. He felt Bakugo's uniform, then the warmth of his skin. He locked his fingers around Bakugo's arm. The contact was like an electric shock. In that instant, with his hand clamped on his friend's arm, the entire universe seemed to hold its breath. The roaring in his ears, the screams of the crowd, the crackle of the flames, it all vanished. There was only the feeling of Bakugo's arm in his grasp and the singular, overwhelming thought in his mind. I have to save him. I have to take his place. Let it be me. Let him go. And then, he screamed. But it wasn't a scream of terror. It was a scream of pure, undiluted will. Let him go! A silent, invisible cataclysm erupted from the point of contact. It wasn't light or sound. It was a feeling. A fundamental shift. It felt like a hook had been thrown from Izuku's soul and had snagged onto Bakugo's pain. And with all the desperate strength in his being, Izuku pulled. For Katsuki Bakugo, the world returned in a sudden, violent rush. One moment, he was drowning, his lungs screaming for air they couldn't get, the villain's immense pressure crushing the life from him. The villain's body, which had felt like semi-solid rock, had a particularly sharp, dense core that was digging into his right shoulder, a searing point of agony. His vision was tunneling, black spots dancing at the edges. He was going to die here, in a sewer-stinking alley, at the hands of this pathetic excuse for a villain. And then, it was just gone. The pressure vanished. The pain in his shoulder evaporated. The burning in his lungs was replaced by a flood of cool, clean air. He coughed, stumbling forward as the sludge that had imprisoned him seemed to lose all its cohesion, sloughing off him like water. He fell to his knees, gasping, his body shaking uncontrollably. He was free. He could breathe. He was alive. For Izuku Midoriya, the universe imploded. The moment he pulled, a tidal wave of agony crashed over him. It was not his pain. It was alien, foreign, and 1,000 times worse than anything he could have imagined. First, the suffocation. It was absolute. The air in his own lungs vanished, replaced by a vacuum that felt like his chest was collapsing inward. He clawed at his throat, but there was nothing to claw at. His body was on an open street, surrounded by air, but his brain screamed that he was drowning. He could feel the phantom sensation of thick, gritty sludge filling his mouth, his throat, his lungs. It was cloying and foul, and he gagged on nothing, his body convulsing on the pavement. Then came the pressure. An impossible weight slammed down on him from all sides, as if the sky itself had fallen. His ribs creaked, his muscles screamed, feeling as though they were being squeezed to the point of bursting. It was the exact pressure the villain had been exerting on Bakugo. And then, the sharpest pain of all. A white-hot, piercing agony erupted in his right shoulder. It felt like a giant, sharpened tooth was grinding into the bone, threatening to sever the joint. He cried out, a strangled, wet sound, his vision widening out from the sheer intensity of it. But it wasn't just physical. Crashing into his mind along with the pain was a torrent of raw, undiluted emotion. Bakugo's terror, a frantic, cornered animal fear he would never admit to. His incandescent rage, not just at the villain, but at his own weakness. And underneath it all, a sliver of humiliating despair. All of it flooded Izuku's consciousness, a psychic tsunami that overwhelmed his own identity. He was no longer Izuku Midoriya. He was fear. He was rage. He was pain. He collapsed. His body hit the asphalt with a sickeningly limp thud. His limbs were unresponsive. His last coherent thought was a flicker of confusion. He could see Bakugo, standing, breathing. He's okay. The thought was a small, flickering candle in a hurricane of suffering. It worked. Then, the world winked out. The crowd saw it happen in a blur of motion. The quirkless kid had rushed in. He'd done something. For a second, it looked like he was trying to pull the victim out. And then, as if its strings had been cut, the hostage was suddenly free, stumbling out of the villain's grasp. At the exact same instant, the quirkless kid collapsed like a puppet. Before anyone could process the bizarre turn of events, a thunderous voice cut through the chaos. "Have no fear, for I am here." All Might arrived in a blur of red, white, and blue. He had forced himself past his limit, spurred on by the sight of the two boys and his own shame. He was running on fumes, but his presence was still a tidal wave of hope. Texas Smash! He threw a single, cataclysmic punch. The force of the blow was so immense that it changed the weather. The air pressure shifted, and dark clouds instantly gathered overhead. A downpour began, washing the grime from the street and dousing the fires Bakugo's quirk had started. The sludge villain, its form already destabilized for reasons no one understood, simply disintegrated, splattering across the alley walls in harmless, watery droplets. The crowd roared. The media cameras flashed. All Might struck his iconic pose, a brilliant smile fixed on his face, though inside, his body was screaming in protest. He had done it. The day was saved. His eyes scanned the scene. He saw the blond boy Bakugo, being helped to his feet by death arms, looking shaken but remarkably unharmed. And then he saw the other one. The green-haired boy. The one he had lectured on a rooftop an hour ago. The one he had told to be realistic. He was lying motionless on the ground. Paramedics, freed from the danger, rushed in. Their first priority was the hostage. A young woman with a determined face knelt beside Bakugo. "Are you okay, kid? Can you breathe all right?" she asked, shining a penlight into his eyes. Bakugo nodded, still dazed. I think so." He coughed again. I couldn't breathe. My shoulder. He instinctively reached for his right shoulder, expecting to feel a deep, grinding ache. But there was nothing. A few scrapes, maybe, but the searing pain was gone. "Let's have a look," the paramedic said, checking him over. "Your vitals are a bit erratic from the shock, but no signs of asphyxiation. Lungs sound clear. No major injuries. You're incredibly lucky." Bakugo's head whipped around. Lucky? He remembered the pain. He remembered the feeling of his lungs burning, the world going dark. It had been real. His eyes fell upon the second team of paramedics crowded around a small, still form on the pavement. He could see a shock of familiar green hair. "Deku, we've got another one!" a man's voice yelled, filled with urgency. "He's not breathing! Severe cyanosis!" Bakugo's blood ran cold. He pushed past the paramedic attending to him and stumbled closer, his mind struggling to connect a series of impossible dots. He saw the paramedics fit an oxygen mask over Deku's face. He saw the boy's chest, still and unmoving. "His airway is clear. I don't understand the asphyxia," one medic said, pressing a stethoscope to Izuku's chest. "Lungs are full of fluid. It's like a dryland drowning. Look at his shoulder," another exclaimed, carefully cutting away the scorched fabric of Izuku's uniform. Bakugo saw it. On Deku's right shoulder, blooming across his pale skin, was a horrific, deep purple bruise. It was more than a bruise. It was a cluster of deep tissue contusions, angry and swollen, in a pattern that looked unnervingly like a crushing grip, with a central point of trauma that was almost black. It was the exact spot where Bakugo's own pain had been sharpest. The world tilted on its axis. The roar of the crowd, the rain, the flashing lights, it all faded into a dull hum. Bakugo stared at Deku's broken form, at the injuries that made no sense, at the face blue from a lack of air he himself had been denied. The pressure vanished. The pain in my shoulder evaporated. The burning in my lungs was replaced by a flood of air. It had all happened in the exact instant Deku collapsed. It wasn't luck. It wasn't a miracle. It was a transaction. Deku, the useless, quirkless, wannabe Deku, had somehow taken it. He had taken the pain. He had taken the suffocation. He had taken the injury that should have been his. The paramedics loaded Izuku onto a stretcher, their movements frantic. "We need to go. We're losing him," one shouted, and they began to run towards the waiting ambulance. Bakugo stood frozen in the rain, water plastering his blonde hair to his forehead. The arrogance, the anger, the pride that defined him had been scoured away, leaving behind a raw, gaping cavity of confusion and a terrifying, unfamiliar emotion, guilt. He looked at his own hands, the hands that set off explosions, the hands that were supposed to make him the #1 hero. They were shaking. From atop a nearby building, Toshinori Yagi watched the ambulance scream away, its lights painting the wet street in strobing reds and blues. The crowd was dispersing, the reporters were interviewing the other heroes, but he only had eyes for the retreating vehicle. He had been wrong. So horribly, devastatingly wrong. He had told the boy he couldn't be a hero. He had lectured him on realism and pragmatism. And then that same boy, with no power to his name, had done what none of the pros on the scene could. He had acted. He had saved a life. He had shown the spirit of a true hero, the spirit of self-sacrifice. And the world had broken him for it. A cold dread, colder than the rain soaking his suit, settled deep in Toshinori's bones. The boy hadn't just been brave. Something else had happened in that alley. Something impossible. He had seen the transfer from his vantage point. He saw the hostage suddenly recover as the green-haired boy fell. It was too instantaneous, too perfect to be a coincidence. A new, startling thought began to form in his mind, a theory so strange it bordered on the fantastical. What if the boy wasn't quirkless after all? What if he possessed a quirk so rare, so paradoxical, that no one had ever recognized it? A quirk that didn't create power, but absorbed consequence. The ambulance disappeared around a corner, its siren fading into the city's din. Toshinori coughed, a racking, painful spasm, and tasted blood. He had to know. He had to find that boy and understand the price he had just paid. Because if his suspicion was correct, he hadn't just met a brave child today. He had met a martyr in the making, and he, the symbol of peace, had been the one to tell him his sacrifice was worthless. The first thing to return was sound. A steady, rhythmic beeping, a metronome marking a time he didn't understand. It was clean, sterile, and utterly devoid of the chaotic terror that had been the last thing he knew. The sound was an anchor, pulling him up from a deep, dark, and blessedly painless abyss. The next thing was sensation. A dull, full-body ache, like the aftermath of a fever, settled into his bones. His limbs felt heavy, weighted down with lead. The sheets beneath him were crisp and starched, smelling faintly of antiseptic and industrial-strength laundry detergent. A gentle, rhythmic pressure squeezed his hand, a warm and familiar presence in the cold, clinical void. Izuku Midoriya's eyelids fluttered, heavy as storm shutters. The dim light of the room was a shock to his system, and he squeezed them shut again before trying once more. This time, they opened, and the world swam into a blurry, indistinct focus. A face hovered above him. It was pale, framed by a familiar cascade of dark green hair, and etched with lines of worry so deep they looked like scars. Her eyes, wide and red-rimmed, were oceans of fear and relief. "Izuku?" The voice was a raw, trembling whisper. "Oh, Izuku, my baby, you're awake, Mom?" he croaked. His own voice was a stranger, a dry, raspy thing that scraped his throat. A plastic mask was fitted over his nose and mouth, feeding him cool, clean air. His mother, Inko Midoriya, was weeping now, tears flowing freely down her cheeks as she clutched his hand like a lifeline. "Yes, sweetie, I'm here. I'm right here," she sobbed, her other hand coming up to gently stroke his hair away from his forehead. "The doctors, they said, oh, Izuku, I was so scared." He tried to sit up, a surge of adrenaline and confusion propelling him, but a wave of dizziness and a surprisingly sharp pain in his right shoulder sent him slumping back against the pillows. His mind was a fog, a chaotic jumble of sludge and explosions and a suffocating, crushing weight. He remembered running. He remembered grabbing. "Kaken," he whispered, the name tasting like ash. "Is he? He's fine, dear. He's perfectly fine," Inko said quickly, her voice thick with emotion. "Not a scratch on him, they said. He's right over there." She gestured with her head, and Izuku's gaze followed. The room was larger than he thought. By the window, silhouetted against the fading orange light of dusk, stood a figure. Tall, impossibly thin, with sunken eyes and sharp, skeletal features that seemed out of place in the land of the living. It was All Might's secret form, Tashinori Yagi, and beside him, rigid as a statue, was Katsuki Bakugo. Bakugo wasn't looking at him. He was staring out the window at the cityscape, his hands jammed so deep into his pockets that the fabric of his trousers was strained. His shoulders were hunched, his entire posture a defensive knot of tension. He looked smaller than Izuku had ever seen him, stripped of his usual explosive arrogance, leaving behind something brittle and lost. The sight was so jarring, so fundamentally wrong, that Izuku's breath caught in his throat. A gentle, grandmotherly voice cut through the heavy silence. "Well now, look who's decided to rejoin the land of the living. Gave us all quite a scare, young man." An elderly woman in a doctor's coat, with her gray hair tied in a tight bun and a syringe-shaped cane in her hand, bustled over to his bedside. "Recovery girl. UA's legendary nurse. How did I get here?" Izuku asked, his mind slowly piecing together the fractured memories. The ambulance. The screaming siren. The feeling of falling into darkness. "In an ambulance, dearie, with your heart threatening to give up the ghosts," Recovery girl said, her tone brisk but not unkind. She began checking the monitors beside his bed, her sharp eyes scanning the readings. "You presented with a fascinating and frankly terrifying set of symptoms. Severe hypoxia from acute asphyxiation, despite a perfectly clear airway. Widespread soft tissue damage consistent with extreme barotrauma, as if you'd been at the bottom of the ocean. And a grade 3 contusion on your right deltoid so severe it nearly caused a compartment syndrome." Inko flinched at every medical term, her grip on Izuku's hand tightening. Izuku just stared confused. He remembered the feelings, but hearing them described as actual, physical injuries was surreal. "But I'm okay?" he asked, flexing his fingers. The ache was there, but it was distant. Manageable. Recovery girl chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "Okay is an understatement. When they brought you in, you were critical. I used my quirk, heal, to amplify your body's own recovery process. And what a process it is. Your cellular regeneration is remarkable. You healed from injuries that should have put you in the ICU for a week in less than 2 hours. Honestly, if I didn't know any better, I'd say you had a powerful regeneration quirk." She paused, tapping a chart. "But your records say you're quirkless. It's all very peculiar." The word hung in the air. Quirkless. The brand that had defined his entire existence. It was then that Tashinori Yagi moved. He stepped away from the window, his tall, lanky frame casting a long shadow across the room. His face was solemn, his eyes holding a depth of gravity that Izuku had only ever seen in All Might's heroic persona. "Young Midoriya," he began, his voice low and serious. He waited until Izuku's full attention was on him. "I need you to be completely honest with us. I saw what happened in that alley. The villain had the other boy trapped. And then, at the moment you touched him, everything changed. The boy was freed, and you collapsed." He took another step closer, his gaze unwavering. "What did you do?" The room fell silent. The only sound was the steady, reassuring beep of the heart monitor. Inko looked from Tashinori to her son, her expression a mask of confusion. Bakugo, though he still faced the window, had gone utterly still, his back ramrod straight. He was listening. Izuku swallowed, the dry scrape in his throat returning. He looked at his own hands, resting on the white hospital blanket. They looked so small, so normal. How could he explain a feeling that had felt bigger than the universe? I don't know," he started, his voice barely a whisper. "He was dying. Kaken was dying, and the heroes they couldn't do anything. I just ran." He looked up, his eyes finding Tashinori's. "When I grabbed him, all I could think was that I had to save him. It was more than a thought. It was a need. I wanted to take his place." He took a shaky breath, the memory rising up like a phantom limb. "It was like I reached into him. Not with my hands but with my will. I felt his pain, the suffocation, the pressure, the feeling of the villain's teeth in his shoulder. He unconsciously touched his own shoulder, where the phantom pain had been so real. And I just pulled it all out of him. And into me. The confession hung in the air, fragile and unbelievable. Inko's face strained of all color. Her hand flew to her mouth, a horrified gasp escaping. Izuku, no! Recovery Girl's eyebrows shot up to her hairline, her professional curiosity igniting into sheer astonishment. She looked from Izuku to the medical chart and back again, a dozen different puzzle pieces snapping into place in her mind. A transfer quirk, she breathed, her voice filled with awe. A somatic and empathic transfer quirk of the highest order. You're not just healing fast, boy. You're taking the injuries of others onto yourself. The diagnostic report, it all makes sense now. The silence that followed was shattered by a sudden, violent movement. Bakugo whipped around from the window, his face a maelstrom of emotions Izuku had never seen there before. Not anger, not pride, but a horrifying cocktail of dawning comprehension, revulsion, and stark, undiluted guilt. His crimson eyes locked onto Izuku's. They were wide, haunted. It was me, he choked out, the words sounding like they were torn from his throat. The pain in my shoulder, the suffocation, it all just stopped. He looked at Izuku, lying broken and battered in the hospital bed, and then looked at his own pristine, uninjured body. He saw the bruises and oxygen mask on Izuku and remembered the paramedic's words. You're incredibly lucky. It was a lie. He wasn't lucky. He was a debtor. Deku, the worthless, pebble-in-the-road Deku, had paid a price that should have been his. The thought was so fundamentally abhorrent to his entire worldview, so shattering to his perception of strength and weakness, that he couldn't bear it. Without another word, he turned and fled. He didn't run. He just walked, stiffly and quickly, out of the room, shutting the door behind him with a soft click that echoed in the silence like a gunshot. He couldn't be in that room. He couldn't look at the evidence of his own weakness and Deku's sacrifice. Inko started to sob again, not from relief this time, but from pure terror. A quirk that hurts you? A quirk that takes injuries? She clung to Izuku's arm, her knuckles white. No. No, Izuku, you can't do that. You'll be killed. It's not heroic, it's suicide. Her panic was a physical thing, filling the room with a mother's desperate fear for her child. Izuku didn't know what to say. He had a quirk. After a lifetime of prayer, he had a quirk, and it was everything his mother feared. It was a curse dressed as a miracle. Mrs. Midoriya, Toshinori said, his voice gentle but firm, cutting through her distress. Please, take a moment. He looked at Izuku, and the pity was gone from his eyes. In its place was something else, a profound, solemn respect. Young Midoriya, what you did today, I have never seen anything like it. I told you that you couldn't be a hero without a quirk. I was wrong. Izuku's heart stuttered. The words he had longed to hear his entire life, spoken by his idol. Toshinori continued, his voice resonating with a new kind of conviction. You have the heart of a true hero. The instinct for self-sacrifice is the purest form of heroism there is, and it seems, you have a quirk to match that spirit in the most painful way imaginable. He glanced at Inko, whose sobs had quieted to whimpers. Your fear is understandable, ma'am. Any parent would feel the same. The path of a hero is fraught with peril, no matter their quirk, but your son possesses something that cannot be taught. The question is not whether he should use this power, but how he can learn to bear its weight. He turned his full attention back to Izuku, and the air in the room seemed to change. This was no longer a civilian giving advice. This was the symbol of peace making a decision. I cannot offer you one for all, he said, the name of his quirk spoken in a low, conspiratorial tone. Izuku's eyes widened. Toshinori shook his head. It would be redundant. Your body is already a vessel for a power of immense potential. A power that needs to be honed, controlled, and understood. A power that, if left unchecked, will destroy you. He drew himself up to his full, skeletal height, and for a moment, Izuku could almost see the specter of his muscular form superimposed over him. I cannot give you a quirk, young Midoriya. But I can offer you my knowledge, my experience, my mentorship. I can train you. I can teach you how to strengthen your body to withstand the blows you take for others. I can teach you how to manage the pain, both physical and mental. I can help you turn this curse, as your mother fears it to be, into the shield you were born to wield. He paused, his gaze boring into Izuku's. I can help you become a hero. A different kind of hero, one who saves lives by suffering, and grows stronger with every scar. The offer hung in the air, more shocking, more profound than the offer of one for all ever could have been. This wasn't a gift of power. This was an acceptance of the power Izuku already had. It was validation. It was a promise of partnership. Inko looked at Tashinori, her fear warring with the awe that the man, even in this withered state, commanded. But why? Why would you? Tashinori's expression softened, and a deep, world-weary sadness entered his eyes. He let out a long, slow sigh, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. Because, in a way, I understand. Without any warning, he lifted his loose-fitting t-shirt. Izuku gasped. Inko's hand flew to her mouth again, stifling a cry of shock. Even Recovery Girl, who had surely seen the injury before, looked away with a grimace. There, on the left side of Tashinori's torso, was a wound unlike anything Izuku could have imagined. It was a nightmare rendered in flesh, a massive, puckered, star-shaped scar, with the skin drawn tight and discolored, a swirling vortex of ruined tissue that seemed to pull the rest of his gaunt frame inward. It wasn't just a scar, it was a crater, a testament to a cataclysmic impact that should have obliterated him entirely. 5 years ago, Tashinori said, his voice a low rumble of pain and memory, as he let the shirt fall back into place. I fought a villain who did this to me. He took my stomach. I've had multiple surgeries, but I'm a shadow of my former self. My quirk, it's like a fire that's burning out. Every time I use my power, it's like pouring gasoline on the embers. It flares up, but it eats away at what little time I have left. He looked directly at Izuku, and in that moment, the gulf between them, the symbol of peace and the quirkless fanboy, vanished completely. They were two sides of the same, tarnished coin. You have a power that hurts you from the inside out every time you use it to save someone, Tashinori said, his voice thick with a shared, bitter understanding. So do I. Your body is a vessel for the pain of others. Mine is a vessel for my own slow decay. We are both broken men, young Midoriya. The question is, what do we do with our broken pieces? The room was silent, steeped in the gravity of his confession. He had shared his deepest, most guarded secret, not just with Izuku, but with his mother and Recovery Girl, to forge a bond of trust. He was entrusting them with his weakness, just as Izuku had entrusted him with his. Izuku looked from All Might's haunted eyes to his mother's tear-streaked face. He saw her fear, her love, her terror for him. And he understood it. But he also understood the look in Bakugo's eyes before he fled, the look of someone who had been saved. He remembered the feeling, not of the pain, but of the purpose. The absolute certainty that he was doing the right thing, no matter the cost. His quirk was pain. His quirk was suffering. But it was also salvation. It was a power that could look at a person's worst moment and say, "Give it to me." Slowly, deliberately, he reached up and removed the oxygen mask from his face. The air in the room felt good, real. He took a deep breath, feeling the dull ache in his chest, a reminder of the price he'd paid. He looked at Tashinori Yagi, the #1 hero, his idol, who now stood before him as a fellow sufferer. Yes, Izuku said, his voice no longer a croak, but quiet and firm, filled with a resolve that was forged in the heart of that afternoon's agony. Yes, All Might. Please. Teach me. A faint, tired smile touched Tashinori's lips. It wasn't the beaming, camera-ready smile of the symbol of peace. It was something smaller, more genuine, and infinitely more meaningful. Then our work begins tomorrow, young Midoriya, he said. Rest now. You have a long, painful road ahead of you. As Tashinori and Recovery Girl quietly exited the room, leaving him alone with his mother, Izuku looked down at his right shoulder. The skin was still tender, but the horrifying bruise was already fading to a pale yellow, a testament to Recovery Girl's power and his own strange biology. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that it would leave a scar. A faint, silvery white mark, his first scar. The first entry in a new kind of hero analysis. Not a record of others' powers, but a map of his own pain, a testament to the life he had saved. He looked at his hands, no longer seeing them as empty and useless, but as tools. They were the instruments of a terrible and beautiful new purpose. The price of empathy was steep, but for the first time in his life, Izuku felt like he had something of value to pay. The stench of Dagoba Municipal Beach Park was an assault on the senses. It was a putrid cocktail of decade-old brine, rotting garbage, and the metallic tang of rust, all baked into a miasma by the relentless sun. The beach was less a shoreline and more a landfill's graveyard, a testament to years of neglect where rusted cars, defunct appliances, and mountains of plastic waste had supplanted the sand. It was a scar on the face of the city, and for the past 3 months, it had been Izuku Midoriya's personal hell and his sacred training ground. More! Put your back into it, young Midoriya! A reedy voice commanded from atop a mountain of discarded electronics. Toshinori Yagi, in his skeletal form, looked like a scarecrow presiding over a kingdom of junk. He sipped from a thermos of what Izuku hoped was tea, his bony frame swallowed by a loose tracksuit. Izuku gritted his teeth, his muscles screaming in protest. He was straining against the dead weight of a waterlogged, rust-pocked refrigerator, trying to haul it onto a flatbed truck. His arms, though now corded with nascent muscle, trembled with the effort. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes and plastering his green hair to his scalp. Every fiber of his being wanted to collapse. This isn't training for my quirk! Izuku gasped out, his voice a strained wheeze. This is just manual labor, nonsense! Toshinori called back, his tone light but unyielding. This is the absolute foundation. Think of your body as a cup, my boy. Right now, it's a cheap paper cup. If you try to pour the boiling water of another person's agony into it, what will happen? Izuku didn't need to answer. He knew the metaphor. The cup would dissolve, collapse, and spill its contents everywhere. Exactly. We need to turn your body into a steel chalice. A vessel capable of containing the immense pressures you will subject it to. The stronger your baseline physique, the more punishment you can absorb before you break. Every muscle you build, every ounce of endurance you gain, is another layer of armor. It is the difference between taking a broken arm and having your entire body go into traumatic shock. So heave, with a final, desperate roar that was more frustration than strength, Izuku gave one last monumental pull. The refrigerator's rusted feet screeched against the ground before finally sliding up the ramp and crashing onto the truck bed with a deafening clang. Izuku fell to his knees, his chest heaving, his vision swimming with black spots. This was the American Dream Plan. A 10-month regimen Toshinori had designed that was both brutally simple and sadistically effective. Clean the entire beach before the UA entrance exams. Every piece of trash, from the smallest bottle cap to the largest sedan, had to be sorted and removed. It was a Herculean task designed to forge a body worthy of a hero. But for Izuku, it was only half the battle. The physical training was grueling, but the other half was terrifying. Later that evening, as the sun bled orange and purple across the horizon, the second phase of training began. The physical work was done, but the mental work was just starting. All right, focus, Toshinori said, his voice softer now. They sat on a cleared patch of sand, the gentle lapping of the waves a stark contrast to the earlier cacophony. Breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth. Find your center. Izuku sat cross-legged, his eyes closed, trying to obey. But his mind was a hornet's nest of activity. He could feel the phantom ache in his right shoulder, a ghostly echo of the pain he'd absorbed from Bakugo. It wasn't real pain, but a psychic residue, a constant reminder of the quirk slumbering within him. His thoughts raced. Did I haul enough today? What if I'm not strong enough? What if the next time is worse? What if I have to take a fatal wound? Can you even take a fatal wound? Would I just die? What would Mom do? You're fidgeting, Toshinori observed. Your mind is loud. You need to learn to quiet the noise. When you take an injury, you won't just get the physical trauma, you'll get a flash of the victim's emotional state, their terror, their panic, their despair. If your own mind is a chaotic storm, their emotions will capsize you. You need an anchor, a place of calm within yourself that you can retreat to. It's hard, Izuku admitted, opening his eyes. I just keep thinking about what it felt like. Not just the pain. The fear. It wasn't mine, but I felt it. Tashinori nodded grimly. I know. My master used to say that the strongest heroes are not those who are fearless, but those who can feel the fear of others and still find the courage to act. Your quirk makes that literal. You must learn to differentiate. To feel their pain, their fear, but to know, fundamentally, that it is theirs, not yours. You are the vessel, not the source. Acknowledge the feeling, process it, and then let it go. It sounded so simple when he said it. But how could you let go of a feeling that was forcibly injected into your very soul? The next stage of pain management was even more direct. Tashinori had dragged a massive industrial cooler to the beach, filled with bags of ice and seawater. It was an ice bath. Pain is a signal, Tashinori explained as Izuku stared into the frigid, slushy water with dread. Your brain interprets a sensation and screams danger. Retreat! Your task is to listen to the signal, acknowledge it, but override the command to retreat. You must endure. You must remain in control. Stepping into the bath was a shock so profound it stole his breath. The cold was a living thing, 1,000 icy needles stabbing into every inch of his skin. His entire body screamed in a singular, primal chorus. Get out! Breathe! Tashinori's voice barked from outside the cooler. Don't fight the cold! Accept it! Let it wash over you! Find your center! Izuku's teeth chattered violently. His muscles seized. All he wanted to do was leap out and escape the Arctic agony. But he thought of the crushing pressure of the sludge villain. This was just cold. It wasn't trying to kill him. It wasn't filled with malice. It was just sensation. He closed his eyes, his breath coming in ragged, shuddering gasps. It's just cold. I am not the cold. I am feeling the cold. He tried to find that quiet place Tashinori spoke of, that inner anchor. It was like searching for a single quiet room in the middle of a raging rock concert. But slowly, painstakingly, he found a flicker of it. A tiny point of stillness in his mind. He focused on it, nurtured it, held on to it as the icy torment raged around him. His shivering began to subside. His breathing evened out. He wasn't warm, he wasn't comfortable, but he was enduring. He was in control. When Tashinori finally told him to get out after 5 minutes that had felt like an eternity, he stumbled out, his skin lobster red and numb, but a small, fierce spark of victory glowed in his chest. The months bled into one another. The mountain of trash on the beach shrank, while the muscles on Izuku's body grew. He could now haul 2 washing machines at once. His meditation sessions grew longer, the inner silence easier to find. He could last 15 minutes in the ice bath, his mind a calm island in a sea of frigid pain, but it was all theory. He hadn't used his quirks since that day. The thought of it filled him with a cold, creeping dread. He was training for a moment he hoped would never come. One afternoon, Tashinori approached him with a grave expression. The physical training was over for the day, and Izuku was stretching his aching muscles. Young Midoriya, he began, his voice low. The theory is sound. Your body is stronger. Your mind is more disciplined, but a soldier who has only ever trained on a firing range is not ready for a real battlefield. It's time for a practical exercise. Izuku's blood ran cold. A practical exercise? A controlled one, Tashinori clarified quickly. I've been monitoring civic channels. There was a minor construction accident a few blocks from here. A man fell from a short ladder. He has a clean, simple fracture of the radius in his left arm. No other complications. The paramedics have stabilized him, but they're waiting for transport. Izuku stared at him, his heart starting to hammer against his ribs. You want me to break my own arm? Tashinori's face was grim. The ethical weight of what he was asking a 14-year-old boy to do was etched into the lines around his eyes. I want you to save someone from their pain, yes. The injury is minor, easily healed by recovery girl, who is waiting nearby. This is the safest possible scenario we could hope for. It's a chance to use your quirk consciously, to feel the transfer, to analyze the sensation, and to prove to yourself that you can control it. He placed a bony hand on Izuku's shoulder. I will be right there with you. You will not be alone. Izuku's throat felt tight. He nodded, unable to find the words. The walk to the construction site was the longest few blocks of his life. Every step was a drumbeat of approaching dread. They found the scene easily. A small crowd had gathered around a man sitting on the curb, his face pale and beaded with sweat. His left arm was wrapped in a makeshift splint, and he was cradling it against his chest, his expression a mask of agony. He looked to be in his late 40s, his work clothes covered in sawdust. Toshinori, pulling the hood of his sweatshirt up to obscure his features, approached the foreman. After a quiet, tense conversation, and the discreet flashing of a hero license Izuku didn't know he carried, the foreman nodded, his expression skeptical but desperate. Toshinori knelt beside the injured man. Sir, he said softly. My name is Yagi. My associate here has a very unique healing quirk. It's unconventional, but it is instantaneous. He can take your injury away. All he needs is your permission, and for you to remain calm. The man, whose name was Kenji, looked from Toshinori's gaunt face to Izuku's terrified one. Take it away? How? He grunted, pain lacing his voice. Izuku found his voice, shaky though it was. I absorb it, sir. The injury will transfer to me. But you will be healed. Instantly, Kenji stared at him, a flicker of disbelief warring with the intense pain in his eyes. You'll break your arm for me? Why would any kid do that? Because that's what heroes do. Toshinori answered for him, his voice firm. Kenji looked at his arm, then back at Izuku. The pain was making him desperate. My daughter's recital is tonight, he mumbled, as if to himself. I can't miss it. If this gets me out of the ER, okay. Do it. This was it. Izuku's heart felt like it was going to beat out of his chest. He knelt in front of Kenji, his hands trembling. He remembered Toshinori's instructions. Find your center. You are the vessel, not the source. Control the flow. He took a deep breath, the techniques from months of meditation kicking in. He found the small, quiet space in his mind and held onto it. He looked at Kenji, at the pain etched on his face, and felt a surge of empathy. This man just wanted to see his daughter's recital. I'm ready, Izuku whispered. He reached out and placed his right hand gently on Kenji's splinted forearm. He closed his eyes. He didn't scream or yell this time. He focused his will, just as he'd done in the ice bath, but instead of pushing the pain away, he invited it in. He imagined that hook of energy again, extending from his core, but this time it was controlled, precise. It snaked into Kenji's arm, found the jagged, searing line of the fracture, and latched on. And then, with a silent, focused command, he pulled. Crack. The sound was sickeningly loud, a wet, sharp snap that echoed in the quiet street. It wasn't from Kenji's arm. It was from his own. A bolt of pure, white-hot agony shot up Izuku's left arm. It was a clean, sharp, definitive pain, completely different from the crushing, suffocating agony of the sludge villain. This was focused. It was a broken bone. His broken bone. He cried out, a sharp, choked gasp, and fell back, clutching his arm. The pain was immense, a throbbing, searing fire that blotted out everything else for a moment. But alongside the pain came the emotional flash. It wasn't the apocalyptic terror of Bakugo. It was a wave of frustrated despair, a torrent of anxiety. Damn it, not again. The foreman is going to be furious. How are we going to pay the rent if I can't work? I can't miss Hannah's recital. She'll be so disappointed. She's been practicing for months. I can't let her down. The feelings were so potent, so real, that for a second, Izuku felt a phantom weight of responsibility for a daughter he didn't have. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself back to his anchor. This is not my fear. This is his. I am the vessel. He breathed through the pain, through the foreign anxiety, compartmentalizing it as Toshinori had taught him. It's gone. The voice was filled with sheer, unadulterated disbelief. Izuku opened his tear-filled eyes. Kenji was staring at his own arm. He had removed the splint and was flexing his wrist, turning his hand over and over. There was no pain. No swelling. Not even a bruise. It was perfect. I don't believe it, Kenji whispered. He looked at Izuku, who was now being helped to his feet by Toshinori, his face pale and sweat-drenched, his left arm hanging at an unnatural angle. The man's eyes filled with a profound, humbled gratitude. Thank you, kid. Thank you, Toshinori gave a curt nod. He needs medical attention now. They met Recovery Girl in a discreet black car a block away. The legendary nurse clucked her tongue as she saw Izuku's arm, deliberately inflicting grievous bodily harm on a child. Have I mentioned today how much I question your teaching methods, Toshinori? She grumbled, though her hands were gentle as she examined the break. It was a necessary step, Chio. Toshinori replied, his face still tense. Recovery Girl sighed and gave Izuku a small, smooching kiss on his forehead. Her heel quirk activated, and Izuku felt a wave of warmth and drowsiness wash over him. The sharp edges of the pain began to dull, and he could feel a strange tingling sensation in his arm as his own supercharged regenerative abilities, amplified by her quirk, went into overdrive. The bones began to knit back together at a supernatural rate. Within minutes, the break was healed, leaving behind only a deep, throbbing ache and a profound sense of exhaustion. As they drove back to the beach, Izuku stared out the window, cradling his newly healed arm. The experience had been terrifying, but also empowering. He had controlled it. He had taken the pain, weathered the emotional storm, and come out the other side. A deep sense of relief washed over him, but something else was there, too. A strange, lingering sensation in his healed arm. It didn't feel weak or tender, the way it should have after such a trauma. It felt solid. Denser, as if the bone had not just healed, but had been reinforced, tempered in the crucible of pain. Back at the beach, as the last light of day faded, Izuku stood before the first refrigerator he had ever managed to haul. It felt like a lifetime ago. The quirk takes a toll, Toshinori said, watching him closely. The exhaustion is part of the price. We're done for today. My arm, Izuku said, flexing his fingers. It feels different. That's to be expected, Toshinori said. It's the residual trauma. It will fade. No, it's not that, Izuku insisted. He balled his left hand into a fist. It felt heavier, more solid than his right. He looked at the refrigerator, at the dent he had made in it months ago with a desperate, two-handed shove. On pure instinct, he drew his left arm back. He wasn't channeling any particular energy. He wasn't trying to perform a feat of strength. He was just curious. He punched the refrigerator. It wasn't the dull thud of a fist against metal. It was a percussive, resonant crump. The steel door of the refrigerator buckled inward, a deep, perfect crater in the shape of his fist imprinted on its surface. The metal groaned and tore around the impact point. The force of the blow was so much greater than he'd intended that the recoil sent a shockwave up his arm, making him stumble back. He and Toshinori stared at the damage, then at Izuku's fist, then back at the damage. The silence was absolute, broken only by the gentle sound of the waves. Izuku slowly uncurled his fingers. They were fine. His knuckles weren't even bruised. His arm, the same arm that had been shattered into pieces less than an hour ago, felt perfectly fine. No, it felt more than fine. It felt strong. Impossibly strong. Toshinori's sunken eyes were wide with a dawning, electrifying realization. My boy, he breathed, his voice trembling with an emotion Izuku couldn't decipher. The transfer, it's not just a transfer. Izuku looked at his arm, then at his mentor. What does that mean? When a blacksmith forges a blade, Toshinori said, his voice filled with a hushed awe. They heat it, hammer it, and fold it. They break it down to build it back stronger. Every time it is hammered, every time it is folded, the steel becomes purer, harder, more resilient. He stepped forward and placed a hand on Izuku's left arm, his touch reverent. Your quirk, it doesn't just take the injury. After your body heals the damage, it leaves something behind. A ghost. An echo of the other person's vitality. He looked at the cratered refrigerator. That man was a construction worker. Strong. Durable. When you healed his broken bone, your own bone didn't just mend. It mended stronger. It inherited a fraction of his resilience. The implications of the discovery crashed down on Izuku with the force of a tidal wave. His quirk wasn't just about sacrifice. It was about growth. Every injury he took, every life he saved, every scar he earned, would make him stronger. His body would become a living testament to his heroism, reinforced by the very people he protected. He looked down at his left wrist. In the faint moonlight, he could just make out a faint, silvery white line beginning to form in the skin over his healed radius. It was barely visible, like a thread of moonlight woven into his flesh. His second scar. He touched it, the skin smooth and new. He could almost feel it, a tiny, dormant whisper of power, a resonance of the strength he had absorbed. It was a promise and a warning. The path ahead was paved with 1,000 more injuries, 1,000 more scars. It would be a journey of endless agony, but for the first time, he realized it would also be a journey of endless growth. He was a kintsugi hero, being shattered and reformed, made more beautiful and more powerful with every break. He looked up at the star-filled sky, the ache in his arm a dull throb, the whisper of new power a quiet hum beneath his skin, and he was no longer afraid. He was ready. The gates of Yue High School were monolithic, a towering testament to the dream Izuku Midoriya had chased his entire life. They loomed over the throng of aspiring heroes, glinting in the morning sun, a gateway to a future of glory and fame. The air crackled with nervous energy, a palpable hum of ambition, excitement, and competitive pride. Students compared their flashy quirks, boasted about their training regimens, and sized each other up with predatory gazes. It was a crucible of hope. Izuku felt none of it. For him, the gates did not represent a glorious beginning. They were the entrance to an abattoir, and he was walking in with the express purpose of throwing himself on the butcher's block. He wasn't here to chase a dream. He was here to do a job. A grim, painful, necessary job. He clutched the strap of his backpack, his knuckles white. 10 months of Tashinori's American dream plan had chiseled his once scrawny frame into something lean and resilient. He was no mountain of muscle, but the soft lines of his youth had been replaced by the hard-won definition of relentless labor. He stood taller, his posture straighter, yet he carried himself with an unusual, almost imperceptible caution, as if constantly braced for an impact. It was the posture of a person who knew, intimately, what it was to be broken. His strategy was a radical departure from everything the exam was designed to be. It was a plan born from his sessions with Tashinori, forged in the agony of the ice bath and the sharp, definitive crack of his own bones. He was not here to hunt robots. He was here to hunt pain. Villain points were a currency of destruction. He had no interest in them. His currency was suffering, and he was about to make it rain. His goal was the secret metric, the one Tashinori was certain existed, rescue points. To prove he was a hero, he wouldn't show them how well he could fight. He would show them how well he could bleed. Out of the way, extra! The sharp, abrasive voice belonged to Bakugo, who shoved past him without a second glance. His rival's shoulders were broad, his stride radiating a confidence so absolute it was practically a physical force. But as he passed, Izuku saw his eyes flicker towards him for a barest fraction of a second. There was no taunt, no sneer. There was only a flash of something cold and conflicted before he looked away, his jaw tight. The memory of the sludge villain incident was an unspoken chasm between them now, a debt Bakugo refused to acknowledge and Izuku was forbidden from mentioning. Izuku let out a slow breath, finding his center as Tashinori had taught him. The crowd's excited chatter faded into a dull roar. He was an island of grim purpose in an ocean of hopeful vanity. He was so lost in his mental preparation that he didn't notice the tall, well-built young man with glasses marching up to him until he was already speaking, his arms chopping the air with rigid precision. "Good morning! I see you are also taking this entrance exam. You seem to be taking this far more seriously than the other candidates, who appear to treat this as some sort of social gathering. It is a respectable attitude." Izuku blinked, startled. "Oh. Thank you. My name is Tenya Ida, from Semi-Private Academy," he declared. "I wish you the best of luck, competitor. May our efforts be judged fairly and rigorously." Before Izuku could properly respond, Ida had already marched off, his posture a perfect 90-degree angle. Izuku watched him go, a small, sad smile touching his lips. Ida saw seriousness, but he didn't see the reason. He saw discipline, not dread. He saw a competitor, not a sacrifice. It only served to reinforce how utterly alone Izuku was in his mission. The auditorium was vast, plunging them into a deep, artificial twilight illuminated only by a massive screen. The air was thick with anticipation. Then, the lights hit the stage, and a figure with a ridiculously tall blonde hairdo and a leather jacket struck a pose. "What's up, little listeners? Welcome to the UA entrance exam. Can I get a he?" Silence. The examinees, tense and nervous, stared blankly at the voice hero, present Mike. Izuku barely heard the hero's energetic but unrequited hype. He was focused, absorbing the information like a sponge, filtering it through the lens of his unique strategy. "Like your application says, you'll be rocking a 10-minute mock battle in a super hip urban setting," Present Mike explained, as a map of different battle centers appeared on screen. "You'll be up against 3 types of foe villains. Each one is worth a different point value. Your goal is to use your awesome quirks to rack up as many villain points as you can." As images of the 1, 2, and 3-pointer robots appeared, the other students murmured, planning their attacks. Izuku saw something different. He saw a 1-pointer with spindly legs, perfect for tripping and causing fall injuries. He saw a 2-pointer on tank treads, capable of cornering someone and inflicting crushing damage. He saw the 3-pointer, a bipedal behemoth whose heavy arms could swat examinees into walls. He wasn't planning attacks, he was cataloging threats. He was building a triage flowchart in his head. "And one more thing, listeners!" Present Mike leaned forward conspiratorially. "There's a 4th type of villain. The 0-pointer. This big dude is more of an obstacle. It's worth 0 points, so my advice? Avoid it. It's a gimmick to get in your way." A wave of relief and strategic calculation passed through the crowd. The 0-pointer was the test's red herring, an environmental hazard to be navigated. But Izuku's blood ran cold. An obstacle that big, that powerful, it wasn't a gimmick. It was a catalyst for catastrophe. It was the single greatest potential source for the currency he was trading in. That's where the most severe injuries would happen. That's where he would likely be needed most. "Excuse me. I have a question." The sharp, clear voice was Ida's. He stood bolt upright, a spotlight finding him in the crowd. "On the printout, there are clearly 4 types of villains listed. If this is a misprint, it is a gross error on the part of Japan's most prestigious hero academy. And furthermore," he continued, turning to point directly at Izuku, "you with the curly green hair, you have been muttering and fidgeting this entire time. It is distracting. If you are not taking this seriously, then you should leave." A few students snickered. Izuku's face burned with humiliation, and he clamped his mouth shut, sinking into his seat. All right, examinee 7111. Present Mike calmed him down. "Thanks for the call-out. The 4th villain type is the 0-pointer, worth no points, like I said. As for the other thing, that's where my catchphrase comes in, little listener. Plus ultra. True heroes don't just fight villains, they save people. But that's a secret for the judges. Now let's get to it. To your designated battle centers." Izuku's heart leaped. A secret for the judges. There it was. The confirmation. Rescue points. All Might was right. A fierce, grim validation settled in his chest. His path was the right one. It was the true test. The gates to Battle Center B were even more imposing up close. Before them stretched a vast, sprawling cityscape of concrete and steel, silent and waiting. Izuku stood amidst the crowd, but felt miles away. He closed his eyes and began the breathing exercises, searching for the quiet center in his mind. Breathe in resolve. Breathe out fear. You are the vessel. You are the shield. You look pretty nervous, huh? The voice was light and sweet. He opened his eyes to see a girl with a round, friendly face and a permanent rosy blush on her cheeks. She had short brown hair and was wringing her hands together anxiously. "I'm super nervous," she admitted with a self-deprecating laugh. "There are so many people here, and they all look so confident. I hope I can get enough points." "I am sure you'll do great. Izuku stammered, caught off guard by her sincerity. This was the girl he had seen at the auditorium. Uraraka. Well, good luck, she said with a bright smile, before turning her attention back to the gates. Her simple kindness was a small, warm spark in the cold dread of his mission. He appreciated it more than she could ever know. And start! Present Mick's voice boomed from unseen speakers. For a heartbeat, everyone stood frozen, confused by the lack of a countdown. What are you waiting for? The test has begun. There are no countdowns in a real fight. Run! Run! The dam broke. The crowd surged forward, a tidal wave of quirks and ambition pouring into the concrete canyons of the mock city. But while most of them ran straight, looking for the nearest, easiest target, Izuku veered left. He wasn't looking. He was listening. Crash! Boom! The sounds of the first engagement echoed from an adjacent street. He broke into a sprint, his reinforced body carrying him with a speed that would have been impossible 10 months ago. He rounded a corner, and saw the scene exactly as he pictured it. A swarm of one-pointers were being systematically dismantled by examinees with flashy, long-range quirks. It was a turkey shoot, but in the chaos, a girl with a thick, muscular tail had been blindsided by a two-pointer. The machine had pinned her leg against a concrete barrier, the metal groaning as it applied more pressure. She cried out, a sharp yelp of pain and panic. Her tail whipped around, smashing uselessly against the robot's armored chassis. The other examinees were too focused on racking up their own points to notice her plight. This was it. His first patient. Izuku didn't hesitate. He slid to a stop beside her, his expression grim and focused. I can get you out, he said, his voice low and steady. But you have to trust me. The girl, her face pale with pain, looked at him with wide, confused eyes. How? It's crushing my leg. I know, Izuku said. He knelt, placing his hand on the mangled steel plating of the robot, right over her trapped leg. He could feel the vibrations of her panic struggles. He closed his eyes, found his center, and extended his will. Give it to me. He imagined the hook, latched it onto the splintering agony in her tibia, and pulled. Snap. The sound was horrifyingly intimate, a sharp crack that was felt more than heard. A lightning bolt of pure, unadulterated pain shot up Izuku's own right leg. It was a clean, blinding fracture. He gasped, his breath hitching, his vision swimming with white light. With the pain came the flash of emotion, a sharp spike of claustrophobic terror and a desperate, frustrated anger at being trapped. Not my fear, he thought, his mental training kicking in automatically. Hers. I am the vessel, the girl cried out, but this time in shock, not pain. The pressure was gone. The robot, its internal mechanisms momentarily shorted by the strange energy transfer, shuddered and powered down. She pulled her leg free. It was bruised and scraped, but whole. Unbroken. She looked at it, then at Izuku, who was now leaning heavily against the wall, his face a mask of controlled agony. Your leg, she stammered, pointing at his right leg, which was bent at a slightly unnatural angle. Go! Izuku gritted out, forcing the words through his teeth. Get points! I'm fine. She stared at him for another second, her expression a mixture of awe and bewilderment, before nodding and scrambling away, back into the fray. Izuku leaned against the wall, taking a deep, shuddering breath. The pain was a roaring fire in his leg, but already he could feel his supercharged healing process kicking in. The bone began to knit, the sharp edges of the pain dulling into a deep, throbbing ache. And with the healing came the echo. He felt a new solidity in his leg, a subtle reinforcement. He pushed off the wall and took a tentative step. It held. He was limping, but he was mobile. He had to keep moving. In a darkened observation room, screens flickered, showing feeds from every corner of the battle centers. A small, bear-like creature in a suit sipped tea. Fascinating. Principal Nizam mused, his black eyes fixed on a screen showing Izuku limping down an alleyway. Examinee 7112. 0 villain points, but his file shows he just miraculously recovered from a compound fracture that should have ended his exam. Beside him, a tired-looking man wrapped in bandages scratched his scruffy chin. He didn't recover. He transferred it, Shota Aizawa said, his analytical gaze never leaving the screen. Watch the girl he just saved. She's moving with a slight limp, favoring a leg that was, according to the sensor logs, about to be shattered. The kid's a reckless fool. But he's a new kind of reckless fool. In the back of the room, hidden in shadow, Toshinori Yagi watched, his hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles were white. Every pain gasp from Izuku was a dagger in his own heart. Stay strong, my boy, he thought, his pride warring with a terrible, paternal fear. Show them what a true hero looks like. Back in the city, Izuku followed the sounds of destruction. The echo in his leg had made him faster, his limp fading into a strange, rhythmic gait. He felt more balanced, more grounded. He was a walking tapestry of second-hand resilience. He saw the next disaster before it happened. A boy with a hardening quirk, his skin turned to jagged rock, was going toe-to-toe with a massive three-pointer. He was cocky, blocking the robot's slow, sweeping attacks with his forearms. "Is that all you got, you walking toaster?" the boy taunted, but he misjudged its speed. The robot's other arm swung around in a brutal, unexpected arc. The boy's eyes widened in panic, his hardening faltering for a split second. He was off balance, about to be swatted into a concrete pillar with enough force to turn him into a sack of broken stones. There was no time for a controlled transfer. Izuku reacted on pure instinct. He sprinted forward, his newly reinforced leg propelling him faster than he'd ever moved before. With a desperate cry, he shoved the hardening boy with all his might, pushing him clear of the impact zone. And then Izuku took his place. He had a fraction of a second to brace himself. He crossed his arms over his chest, channeling the pain management techniques from the ice bath. Accept it. Endure it. The robot's massive steel fist slammed into him. The world exploded into a universe of pain. It wasn't the clean, sharp agony of a broken bone. It was a brutal, concussive force that felt like it was trying to turn his insides into outsides. He heard a sickening symphony of cracks as at least 3 of his ribs fractured. The air was driven from his lungs in a single, violent whoosh. He flew backward, hitting the opposite wall with a spine-jarring thud before slumping to the ground in a heap. He lay there, gasping like a fish on land, his vision filled with a blooming kaleidoscope of black spots. The pain in his chest was a supernova, radiating outwards, making every twitch a fresh wave of agony. The emotional flash was a surge of pure, panicked adrenaline and a humiliating sting of overconfidence. Not mine. His. He chanted the mantra in his head, his only anchor in a sea of torment. Dude! Are you crazy? The hardening boy was standing over him, his quirk deactivated, his face a mask of horror. It would have barely scratched me. Your chest is. Izuku didn't look down. He didn't want to see. He just focused on breathing. In. Out. The pain was immense, but his training held. He pushed himself up, first to his hands and knees, then unsteadily to his feet. His body screamed. His head swam. But he was standing. The echo from the first rescue, combined with his own sheer willpower, was keeping him upright. He could feel the new resilience flowing into his fractured ribs, his body already working overtime to mend the brutal damage. He felt tougher. Denser. More solid. Just be more careful. Izuku wheezed, before turning and staggering away, leaving a stunned and speechless examinee in his wake. He was a mess. His leg throbbed, his chest was a bonfire of pain, and his head was fuzzy. He had no points. By all conventional metrics, he was failing spectacularly. But he had saved 2 people. His mission was on track. The minutes ticked by. The 10-minute exam felt like a lifetime. He performed 2 more minor rescues, taking a deep gash from a girl whose shield quirk failed, and absorbing a powerful electric shock meant for a boy who had shorted out a robot. With each transfer, a new scar was mentally etched onto his soul, and a new echo of power was woven into his physical form. The pain was cumulative, a rising tide that threatened to drown him, but so was the strength. He was becoming a patchwork quilt of other people's resilience. His faint, healed scars from training began to emit a soft, silvery white glow, visible only to him, a network of ley lines mapping his growing power. Then the ground began to shake. A low, grinding rumble grew into a deafening roar. Buildings trembled, their windows rattling. A shadow fell over the street, vast and absolute. The zero-pointer had arrived. It was colossal, a titan of steel and pistons that towered over the 20-story buildings. Its head scraped the sky, a single, glowing red eye scanning the battlefield. Its presence was so overwhelming, so far beyond the scale of the other robots, that it inspired a single, unified reaction in every examinee. They ran. A tide of screaming students fled in the opposite direction, a panicked exodus from the path of the walking apocalypse. It was the smart move. The logical move. But then Izuku heard it. Faint, but clear. A small, choked cry from the direction of the giant. While everyone else ran away, Izuku, battered, broken, and running on pure, agonizing will, turned and ran towards the danger. He rounded a corner, and his heart plummeted. There, in the shadow of the zero-pointer's massive foot, was the girl from the gate. Uraraka. She was trapped, her leg pinned beneath a huge slab of concrete dislodged by the robot's advance. She was struggling, her fingers scrabbling at the heavy stone, her face a mask of pure terror as the giant took another lumbering step towards her. This was it. The ultimate test. The reason he was here. He sprinted, his patchwork body groaning in protest. He reached her side, skidding to a halt. "You!" she cried, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and relief. "Help me! My leg is stuck!" Izuku looked from her terrified face to the approaching robot, then down at the slab of concrete. He could never lift it in time. There was only one option. The one he was built for. He knelt beside her, his movements now practiced and sure. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch surprisingly steady. He gave her a smile. It was a pained, bloody, and terrifying thing, but it was genuine. "It's okay," he said, his voice raspy but calm. "I've got you." He moved his hand to the concrete slab, pressing it against her trapped leg. He closed his eyes, took a final, centering breath, and for the last time, he pulled. Crack. The sound was thunderous, a cannon shot of pure agony that dwarfed all the previous breaks. It was his other leg this time, his left one, and the pain was so immense, so absolute, that it nearly sent him into shock. A piercing scream was torn from his throat. The emotional feedback was a tidal wave of pure, helpless terror and claustrophobic despair. It slammed into his already battered psyche, threatening to shatter his focus completely. Uraraka, suddenly free, scrambled back, staring in horror as Izuku collapsed, his left leg now twisted and broken. But something else was happening. As he lay on the ground, his body a symphony of agony, he felt the final echo click into place. The resilience from the girl with the tail. The durability from the hardening boy. The resistance from the electric user. The swiftness from the shield maiden. And now, Uraraka's own desperate, vibrant energy. It all surged through him, a confluence of borrowed power. The silvery scars on his arms and the fresh, invisible wounds all over his body began to glow, not just for him, but for everyone to see. A soft, ethereal light traced a map of his sacrifice across his skin. He looked up at the zero-pointer. It was raising its fist, preparing to bring it down on the spot where Uraraka had been, the spot where he now lay. He had to end this. Fueled by the roaring river of cumulative power and a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, he pushed himself off the ground. He had one good arm and one good leg. It would have to be enough. He coiled his body, channeling every ounce of borrowed strength, every moment of his agonizing training, into a single point. He didn't just jump. He erupted. He launched himself into the air, a glowing, green and silver comet of pure will. He flew past the 10th story, the 15th, the 20th, soaring towards the robot's impassive, gargantuan face. He drew back his one good arm, his right arm, the faint scar from the sludge villain incident glowing brightest of all. He wasn't All Might. He wasn't borrowing a quirk. This power was his own, paid for in blood and bone. This was the culmination of every life he had touched, every pain he had shouldered. Smash! The word was not a catchphrase. It was a prayer. A roar. A declaration. His fist connected with the zero-pointer's head. For a moment, there was only pressure. Then, with a deafening groan of protesting metal, the robot's faceplate buckled. It caved inward, cracks spiderwebbed across its chassis, and with a final, explosive bang, its entire head shattered into 1,000 pieces. The giant stood headless for a moment, and then its systems failed. It froze, inert and defeated. Izuku was still in the air, suspended at the apex of his jump. A wave of triumphant relief washed over him. He did it. He had saved her. Then, the price came due. The recoil from the punch, a force he was never meant to channel, slammed back into him. His right arm, the last good limb he had, shattered in a dozen places. The pain was biblical. It was the final straw. The tide of agony he had been holding back all day finally crested, breaking the dam of his consciousness. His glowing scars faded. The borrowed power vanished. Gravity reasserted its dominion, and Izuku Midoriya began to fall. The world went silent. His vision tunneled. He saw the ground rushing up to meet him. He saw the faces of the examinees below, not with mockery or pity, but with sheer, slack-jawed awe. He saw the girl with the tail, the boy with the hardening quirk, and Uraraka, all staring up at the broken boy who had fallen from the sky after killing a god. He had 0 villain points. He was broken, unconscious, and utterly spent. But in the eyes of everyone he had saved, and everyone who had witnessed it, he was the only true hero on the field that day. His last thought before darkness claimed him was the memory of Toshinori's grim, proud smile. I did it, All Might. I paid the price. The acceptance letter from Yue hadn't been a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. For Izuku Midoriya, it had been a somber confirmation, a sentence handed down by a jury of his heroes. He sat in his bedroom, the small projection of All Might flickering on his desk, but the words were different from the ones he'd imagined 1,000 times. Young Midoriya, the hologram of the skeletal hero had said, his voice quiet but resonant. There are many ways to measure the heart of a hero. Some measure it in power, some in speed, some in villains defeated. But the truest measure, the one that defines the greatest among us, is the capacity for self-sacrifice. The projection had shifted to show a graph. Villain points 0. The number was a stark, brutal indictment of his performance by any traditional metric. But then, another column lit up, glowing a brilliant gold. Rescue points, 120. No applicant in the history of UA High has ever scored 0 villain points and passed the exam. All Might's voice continued, a deep undercurrent of pride in his tone. And no applicant has ever scored close to that many rescue points. You did not just save your fellow examinees from harm, my boy. You took their calamity upon yourself. You showed them what it means to be a shield. This is your hero academia, Izuku Midoriya. Your path begins now. The hologram had faded, leaving Izuku alone with the weight of those words. He was in. He had achieved his lifelong dream. But there was no ecstatic shout, no triumphant fist pump. There was only a quiet, bone-deep ache and the heavy knowledge that his acceptance was not a prize, but a contract written in his own blood and pain. Now, standing before his mirror on the first day of school, that contract felt more real than ever. The UE summer uniform, a crisp white shirt, gray trousers, and a red tie, was laid out on his bed. The short sleeves were a non-negotiable part of the dress code. There would be no hiding. He ran a hand over his left arm, his fingers tracing the faint, silvery white lines that crisscrossed his skin like a bizarre constellation. There was the thin line on his wrist from the construction worker, Kenji. There was a jagged, starburst pattern on his bicep from the girl whose shield had failed during the exam. On his other arm, a ghostly network of lines marked the spot where the zero-pointer's recoil had shattered his bones. His chest, beneath the thin fabric of his undershirt, was a lattice of similar scars from where the three-pointer had crushed his ribs. They didn't hurt anymore, not in the traditional sense, but he could feel them. They were a part of his physical and psychic landscape now, a constant, low-level hum of remembered agony and stored potential. He moved carefully as he dressed, his body a finely tuned instrument that he now had to maintain with the caution of a bomb disposal expert. A wrong move, a careless stretch, and a chorus of phantom pains would remind him of his limits. He was a boy of 15 in the body of a man who had survived a dozen catastrophic accidents. "Izuku, honey, you'll be late!" His mother's voice called from the kitchen. "Coming!" He called back, taking one last look in the mirror. The boy staring back at him was a stranger. The round, hopeful face was still there, but it was thinner, etched with a quiet gravity that didn't belong on someone so young. His eyes, once wide with innocent admiration for heroes, now held a deep, weary understanding of their cost, and his arms, exposed and pale in the morning light, told a story he would never be able to fully explain. He was the boy covered in scars, and today, he was walking into a world that would only give him more. The classroom of 1A was loud, a chaotic symphony of nervous introductions and boisterous personalities. Izuku paused at the ridiculously large door, taking a moment to center himself. He could already hear a familiar, angry voice. "And take your feet off that desk! Such an act is an insult to our upperclassmen and the master craftsmen who built this furniture. Like I care what you think, you four-eyed extra!" Izuku sighed. Ida and Bakugo. Some things never changed. He slid the door open and stepped inside, his eyes immediately scanning the room. He saw the girl with the muscular tail from the exam, the boy with the hardening quirk, and the bubbly, round-faced Uraraka, who was talking animatedly with a girl with pink skin. They were all here, the people he had bled for. His entrance was quiet, but it didn't go unnoticed. Ida, ever vigilant, turned to greet the new arrival. His eyes widened slightly as he took in Izuku's appearance, his gaze catching on the network of scars on his arms. He opened his mouth to say something, then seemed to think better of it, filing the information away with a curt, analytical nod. Uraraka saw him next. Her face lit up with genuine recognition and relief. "It's you!" she exclaimed, bouncing on the balls of her feet. "The boy from the exam. You were incredible! But then you just fell. I was so worried. Are you okay?" "I am fine," Izuku managed, a faint blush dusting his cheeks. "Just a little, worn out." Her concern was a balm, pure and untainted by pity. She didn't look at his scars with revulsion or morbid curiosity, but with a kind of gentle awe, as if she understood they were connected to the incredible feat she'd witnessed. "If you're just here to make friends, then you can pack up and leave." The voice was a low, tired drawl that cut through the classroom chatter like a knife. Every head turned towards the source. Lying on the floor behind the teacher's podium, zipped into a bright yellow sleeping bag like a giant caterpillar, was a man with long, black hair and eyes that were bloodshot and utterly devoid of enthusiasm. "It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down," the man said, unzipping himself and rising to his feet with the weary grace of a predator. "Life is short. You're all lacking in common sense." He stepped forward, his capture weapon draped around his neck like a scarf. "I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa." His gaze swept across the room, a lazy, analytical sweep that missed nothing, and then it landed on Izuku, and it stopped. For a full 3 seconds, Aizawa's tired eyes locked onto Izuku. They didn't just see a nervous student. They saw the careful, deliberate way he held himself. They saw the way his uniform hung on a frame that was deceptively strong. And they saw the scars. Aizawa's gaze traced the silvery lines on Izuku's arms, his expression unreadable but his mind whirring with cold, logical deduction. Not self-harm. The patterns are too external, like impact fractures and healed lacerations. Not old fight scars, they're too clean, almost ethereal. A quirk backlash is the most logical conclusion. A destructive or volatile quirk he can't control. But his file says? Empathic resonance. Vague. This kid is a puzzle. Aizawa broke the stare, his face returning to its default state of bored indifference. "Right. Change into these," he said, pulling a UA gym uniform from his sleeping bag. "Meet me on the field." The quirk apprehension test. The words sent a ripple of confusion through the class. "But what about the entrance ceremony? Or orientation?" Uraraka asked. "If you want to be heroes, you don't have time for pointless ceremonies," Aizawa stated flatly. "UA's biggest selling point is how unrestricted its school traditions are. That's how I get to run my class my way." He turned his gaze back to the students, a subtle, dangerous glint in his eye. "You've been taking standardized tests your whole lives, but you've never been allowed to use your quirks in physical exams. The country still insists on treating us all as if we're created equal. It's not rational." He held up a device. "Today, we're going to find out what you're really made of." The student who scores the lowest in total points across all 8 tests will be judged to have no potential, and will be expelled immediately. A wave of panic washed over the class. Expelled? On the first day? That's not fair! Someone shouted. Aizawa's lips curled into a grim smile. And you think natural disasters are fair? Or power-hungry villains? Or a catastrophic accident that happens in the blink of an eye? Nothing about a hero's life is fair. For the next 3 years, you will throw one hardship after another at you. Our motto is go beyond. Plus ultra. So show me you're ready to overcome some adversity. The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Izuku felt a familiar cold dread mixed with a strange sense of calm. Hardship. Adversity. This, he understood. This was his native language. The first test was the 50-meter dash. Izuku was pitted against Ida and a frog-like girl named Tsuyu Azui. Ida, with the engines in his calves, finished in a blur. Azui was surprisingly quick, using her powerful legs to bound across the distance. Izuku just ran. But he wasn't the slow, clumsy runner he used to be. The echo from the tailed girl he'd saved in the exam had given him a new sense of kinetic balance, a subtle grace in his movements. He finished with a respectable 5.58 seconds. It wasn't heroic, but it was far better than he would have done 10 months ago. The grip strength test came next. He took the dynamometer in his left hand, the one that had healed after taking Kenji the construction worker's injury. He remembered the feeling of that borrowed resilience. He squeezed. The device whirred and beeped, flashing a number that made him blink. 110 kilograms. Not monstrous, but far beyond what his physique would suggest. A few students murmured in surprise. He performed adequately in the standing long jump and the repeated side steps, his enhanced balance and durability keeping him from falling behind. He wasn't at the top, but he wasn't at the bottom, either. He was carefully managing his energy, his body a resource he couldn't afford to squander. Then came the final and most infamous test, the ball throw. Aizawa handed him a softball equipped with a sensor. Midoriya. You're up. Izuku walked into the circle, the eyes of his classmates on him. He could feel their curiosity. He was the boy who had destroyed the 0-pointer but had scored no villain points. He was the quiet kid covered in strange scars who had a surprising amount of physical power. He was an enigma, and this was the moment they expected some answers. He took a deep breath, the ball feeling heavy in his hand. He couldn't afford to hold back here. Expulsion was on the line. But he couldn't afford to break himself again either. He had to find the middle ground. He had to channel the power, not just unleash it. He closed his eyes, shutting out the world. He reached inward, past the aches and the phantom pains, into the very core of his quirk. He thought of the atlas of scars that mapped his body. He wasn't just throwing a ball. He was calling upon the echoes of every person he had saved. The resilience of the construction worker. The kinetic grace of the tailed girl. The sheer durability of the hardening boy. The defiant energy of Uraraka. And most of all, the explosive, overwhelming power he had used to smash the 0-pointer. He focused on his right arm, the one that had delivered the final blow. He imagined the stored energy, dormant within the healed bone and tissue, beginning to stir. And as he did, the scars on his arm began to glow. It started faintly, a soft, silvery luminescence that traced the healed fracture lines beneath his skin. The light intensified, flowing up his arm, converging on his hand until the soft ball itself seemed to be cupped in moonlight. The air around him grew heavy, charged with a strange, quiet energy. His classmates gasped. "Whoa, what's with the light show?" someone whispered. "His scars are glowing?" Bakugo's eyes were wide, his expression a storm of shock and dawning horror. He was seeing it. The proof. Izuku opened his eyes. They were focused, intense. He drew back his arm, his body coiled like a spring, and then he threw. He didn't just use his arm. He put his entire body into it. A perfect transfer of kinetic energy from his toes to his fingertips, all of it amplified by the river of borrowed power flowing through him. The ball shot from his hand with a sound like a rifle crack, a sonic boom in miniature. It rocketed into the sky, a white speck against the blue, leaving a shimmering trail of residual energy in its wake. It flew on, seeming to defy gravity, before finally arcing back down far in the distance. Aizawa's device beeped. He held it up for the class to see. 704.2 meters. A stunned silence fell over the field. It was an incredible score. A pro-hero level score. It was just a single meter shy of Bakugo's. Izuku stood in the circle, his arm outstretched, his whole body trembling from the strain. The light from his scars faded, leaving him pale and breathing heavily. His arm hadn't broken, but it felt like he just tried to throw a car. The cost of channeling that much power was immense, a deep, cellular exhaustion that made his knees feel weak. Aizawa stared at the device, then back at Izuku, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. It wasn't a smile of approval. It was the smile of a scientist who had just found a fascinating, dangerous, and utterly unpredictable new specimen. So that's how it works, he murmured to himself. Not just backlash. It's some kind of symbiotic energy storage. The damage is the price of admission for the power. He looked at Izuku, his gaze sharp and piercing. This quirk of yours, Midoriya. It's going to get you killed if you don't master it. But if you do, you could be a monster. The rest of the tests passed in a blur for Izuku. He was spent, his body aching from the massive energy expenditure. He stumbled through the final exercises, finishing near the bottom in each. When Aizawa finally displayed the final rankings, Izuku found his name hovering just above the halfway mark. He wasn't last. Mineta, the small boy with the purple balls on his head, was. By the way, Aizawa said with a lazy yawn, I was lying about the expulsion. It was a rational deception to push you to your limits. The class erupted in outrage, while a girl with a black ponytail calmly explained that, of course, it was a lie. Izuku just felt a wave of profound relief wash over him. He had survived. The walk back to the classroom was different. The whispers that followed him were no longer just about the zero-pointer. They were about the glowing scars, the incredible throw, the mysterious nature of his power. He was no longer just a nervous kid. He was the class's biggest question mark. He was putting his books in his bag, his movements slow and deliberate, when a shadow fell over his desk. Deku, the voice was low, dangerously quiet. Izuku looked up. Katsuki Bakugo stood before him, his crimson eyes burning with an intensity that went beyond simple anger. He wasn't posturing. He wasn't yelling. He looked shaken. Follow me, he growled, before turning and stalking out of the classroom. Izuku's heart hammered in his chest, but he knew he couldn't refuse. He followed Bakugo through the now empty hallways, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Bakugo didn't stop until they reached a deserted stairwell, the late afternoon sun slanting through a high window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. He whirled around, cornering Izuku against the cool concrete wall. Don't lie to me, Bakugo snarled, his voice a low, trembling wire of controlled rage. I saw it. At the exam. In the classroom. Just now on the field. The scars. The glow. The sudden power. You've been hiding it all this time. You've been laughing at me behind my back, letting me think you were some useless, quirkless pebble. No, Kaken, it's not like that. Izuku protested, his voice firm, not stammering. He had rehearsed this moment in his head, but it didn't make it any easier. Then what is it? Bakugo demanded, slamming a hand against the wall next to Izuku's head. The impact echoed in the stairwell. What the hell is your quirk, Deku? The question wasn't just a demand. It was a plea. A desperate need to understand the event that had fundamentally broken his worldview. Izuku looked his childhood friend in the eye. He saw the fury, the pride, the arrogance. But underneath it all, for the first time, he saw a sliver of fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of the dead he couldn't comprehend. It's new, Izuku said, his voice quiet but steady. It didn't manifest until the day with the sludge villain. Bakugo flinched as if he'd been struck. The name of the event hung between them, a ghost at their feast. My quirk, it lets me take injuries from other people, Izuku explained, the words tasting like metal in his mouth. I absorb them into my own body. The pain, the damage, everything, and when my body heals, it leaves a little of their strength behind. An echo. That's the power you saw. It's not mine. It's borrowed. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Izuku had ever heard. Bakugo just stared at him, his furious expression slowly melting away, replaced by a look of dawning, gut-wrenching comprehension. The gears were turning in his head, connecting a series of impossible dots with horrifying clarity. The sludge villain. The feeling of drowning. The searing pain in his shoulder. And then, nothing. The sudden, inexplicable freedom. The paramedic's words. You're incredibly lucky, and Deku. Deku on the stretcher. Deku with the oxygen mask. Deku with the deep, horrific bruise on his shoulder that was the exact mirror image of the pain he'd felt. It wasn't a rescue. It was a transference. A sacrifice. Deku, the quirkless, useless, worthless Deku he had spent his entire life tormenting and looking down on, had literally taken his place on the brink of death. He had shouldered a burden that Bakugo, for all his power and pride, had been unable to bear, and that act, that single moment of impossible, sacrificial heroism, had been the catalyst for the very power he now possessed. Izuku's strength was born from Bakugo's moment of ultimate weakness. The revelation didn't just wound Bakugo's pride. It eviscerated it. It took his entire philosophy of strength, of winning, of being the best, of never needing help, and shattered it into a million pieces. He had not been saved by a superior hero. He had been saved by a martyr. He owed his life, and potentially Izuku's very quirk, to the one person he deemed beneath him. The debt was absolute, unpayable, and utterly humiliating. He didn't speak. He couldn't. What could he possibly say? Thank you? The words would taste like poison. I'm sorry? It wouldn't even begin to cover the years of cruelty. So he just stood there, his hands still braced against the wall, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking with a silent, internal earthquake. The fire in his eyes was gone, replaced by the cold, dead ash of a truth he could never escape. Finally, he pushed himself off the wall. He didn't look at Izuku. He couldn't. He just turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy and uneven on the stairs. The explosive swagger was gone, replaced by the weary gait of a soldier who had just lost a war he never knew he was fighting. Izuku watched him go, leaning his head back against the cool concrete, letting out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He had told the truth. And it had broken something between them forever. Their rivalry was no longer a simple race to the top. It was now a twisted, complex dance around a gaping wound of sacrifice and debt. He touched a scar on his arm, the skin smooth and deceptively normal. It was a reminder. A brand. The price of empathy was high, and he was just beginning to understand how many people it would make him pay.